This is Undaunted Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we are going to keep the end-of-year awards show theme going. We've already done the best books of 2024. You could check that episode out. It just came out on Tuesday. But here we are with the best podcasts of 2024. And as I told you before, with Undaunted Life, we have become, this year, the number one podcast for Christian men in the entire world. And part of the reason that is because you guys are leaving reviews and sharing the show with others. So those are the two biggest things that kind of brick the algorithm, that kind of push us up. And so if you have not left us a 5-star review, do that and share this with a friend. If you're either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, it's like 2 buttons and you can share this with someone that you like. Also, we're creeping up on the end of the year. We are a donation-based ministry. So guys, keep us in mind with your end-of-year giving. Undaunted.Life/donate. That is in the show notes. We're always so thankful to our donors. So this is our award show for best podcast of 2024. And so basically here in a bit, I'm going to talk a little bit about my podcast and kind of how I consume content and stuff like that. But we're going to have one side where I give awards to other shows, and then I'm going to have awards for Undaunted Life, a man's podcast. You can look at them at awards, or we're just picking favorites or whatever. But we're going to do that. I'm trying to think of everything else we're going to do. We will do a best overall podcast show. So stick with us. We're going to do best overall podcast show and best overall podcast episode. And then as it pertains to Undaunted Life, a man's podcast specifically, we're going to get into the hardest interview and hardest episode to prepare of this year, the most offensive episode of 2024, the most talked about interview and episode of this year, the interview that I was most nervous about, the episode I was most nervous about, the audience's picks for favorite interview and favorite episode, and then also my personal favorite interview and favorite episode. So I always tell you guys this in terms of how I listen to podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time because I got these right here, these little AirPods. I keep these in my pocket. And so like if I'm waiting for, I don't know, I'm picking something up, picking my boys up, I'm listening to podcasts, or I'm taking the dog for the walk. When I work out in the morning, I'm kind of a lunatic. I listen to it, but I listen to it on 2x speed. And so some of you are like, oh, I just can't do that. I can do like 1.25 or 1.5. I promise you, your brain will adjust to 2x speed. I absolutely promise. You just have to make the jump. So if you're listening to it at 1x speed right now, just make the jump, because literally, guys, this is easy math. You can get in twice as much content, twice as many episodes. For me, I'm a content junkie. I listen to well over 1,000 podcast episodes per year. Some are 5 minutes long, some are 2 or 3 or 4 hours long. But also in terms of wanting to get better content in, just like a crappy book, and I'm a finisher, right? So if I start a crappy book, I have to finish. If I start a crappy movie, I have to finish it. But if it's a podcast and you're just like, you've lost the thread and there's like 2 hours left and you're like, I don't really get it, I don't really know, just skip it. Just skip it. There's so much good content out there. And then you have a chance to re-listen to one of our episodes. See how that works out? But also, you can move on to the next podcast after you kind of get the point. There are some podcasts, I'll leave them nameless, but there are some people that really like to repeat themselves. There are some people that just say the same thing over and over, but then somehow fill up an hour with that content. Once you feel like you get the point, you can move on, and just every down chance you get. Okay, so if you're not like reading scripture or like meditating or praying or something like that, or meditating on scripture, don't worry, guys. I'm not going all Eastern on you, but just any normal downtime that you have. Like one thing that I like to do. So if I'm doing like real quick stuff around the house, so like if I'm cooking or if I'm like finishing up my laundry or something like that, I'm just throwing in my AirPods and I'm just getting some of that content in. So I'm going to go ahead and remind you guys of my lineup of podcasts. Okay. So, I used to put the links to all these in the show notes and things like that, but you guys listen on so many different devices and so many different platforms. I'm just going to name them, and then you can go find them yourself. And so also consider me mentioning these podcasts specifically as an endorsement of these shows. But obviously, I don't fully support everything that is said by every person on every episode of each of these podcasts because that would be silly. Now, in terms of a couple of podcasts that I've added this year, and I've come in and out of a few different ones, but 2 that are in the rotation now are the Mike Glover Show. So we love Mike Glover out there in Utah, and also the Good Guy, Bad Guy podcast with Chael Sonnen and Daniel Cormier. So that's where I kind of get my MMA fix. So in terms of the shows that I do not miss, I will not miss an episode. If I look back on the entire year, I didn't miss an entire episode of any of these podcasts. We've got The Briefing with Albert Mohler. Listen to that every morning. I've got Morning Wire, which I listen to every morning and afternoon. The Ben Shapiro Show, that's my lunchtime podcast. The Matt Walsh Show, PragerU 5-minute videos, Dan Carlin's Hardcore History only releases 2 or 3 episodes a year of that. And then Deepen with Pastor Joby Martin. Now, this next group, these are consistent listens. These are almost every episode. I do skip around some with these. So I've got Church of 1122 and The Village Church. Those are the sermon podcasts for Joby Martin and Matt Chandler. The thing is when they have guests come, I skip them. I know you're not supposed to and give the guy a chance. Well, I got to move on to stuff that I know that I'm going to like. And so I do skip whenever they have guests. So sue me. It is what it is. Also, I listen to a lot of Cooper stuff with John Cooper. The Jordan B. Peterson podcast. Some of his guests, I just don't really get it. It's just I don't really want to listen to this. Fireside Chat with Dennis Prager and Bill Burr's Monday Morning Podcast. That's gotten a little stale for me, so that may, hit the chopping block at some point in 2025. We'll see. Also, some podcasts that I listen to here and there. The Joe Rogan Experience. I'm very picky and choosy with that one. Basically, if he's got a comedian on there that I don't know, I don't like listening to him just talking crap about random subjects for 3 hours, but I do pick up a lot of those shows. I also listen to The Sean Ryan Show, The Chad Prather Show, Unashamed with Phil, Jason, Al Robertson, Jocko Podcast, Danger Close with Jack Carr, Mike Dropper with Mike Ritland, The Way I Heard It with Mike Rowe, The Art of Manliness Podcast with Brett McKay, The Lex Freeman Podcast, Huberman Lab, that's one that I added last year. Some of those I'm not really into, but I do get quite a few of those. Mike Glover Show, the Mark Driscoll Podcast, and the Mountain Tough Podcast. And guys, if I'm missing any, let me know, because I don't assume that I have the list of all the best ones, but I will say I am very, very picky. For a show to make it into my rotation, it's got to be fire. So I'll just tell you that from the beginning. Hey guys, real quick. Very early on in Undaunted Life, I knew I wanted to partner with a meat delivery service, but I didn't know which one to do. So I tried out several different ones, and here's the thing that I found out about some of the most popular brands that you've heard of before. These are people that are sending you stuff that is produced here in the United States, but every single month you might be getting beef from a different farm. And so one month your box may be full of amazing beef, and the very, very next month you're going to get stuff that isn't up to snuff and stuff that you don't want to feed yourself or your family. And so I wanted to partner with a farm, with an operation, with a cattle producer that is giving you the same high quality beef every single month. And that's why I want you to use the official beef delivery partner of Undaunted Life, Primal Beef. Primal Beef is a cattle operation owned and operated by Sean Glass. He's a retired Navy SEAL that partnered with Jocko Willink, yes, that Jocko Willink, to launch Primal Beef. So what makes Primal Beef different from the other beef delivery companies? It's a combo of the following. It's all American Black Angus cattle. The beef comes from one farm, and that's in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley. The beef is all natural, no hormones ever, no antibiotics ever, no mRNA ever. After slaughter, the entire carcass is dry aged and then hand cut by artisan butchers and then flash frozen to ensure that it maintains tenderness, marbling, and flavor. And here's another cool thing. For every box sold, Primal Beef donates meat directly to a member of America's Special Operations Forces through the C4 Foundation. So you can take pride in knowing that your purchase will help put literal food on the table for America's finest warriors. Are you salivating yet? If not, it's probably because you're a communist. Don't be a communist and try Primal Beef out today by going to www.primalbeef.com. That's primalbeef.com. Use the promo code Kyle to get $25 off your first order. Again, that's primalbeef.com. Promo code Kyle, Kyle, to get $25 off your first order. Let's go and get into awards time, and I'm going to try to make this as brief as possible because I want you guys to actually go back and listen to some of these episodes. So if it's from other shows, I want you to go find those, and also I'll put this list in the show notes, but you can find them on your own platform. But also I want you to go back and re-listen to some of the favorites from this year from our show. So here's some random can't miss episodes that I'm just going to mention because I just thought that these were especially awesome. I saved these in my Apple podcast. So Morning Wire, their episode from 12/15, that is Decoding Trump's Win, a 2024 election analysis. Then we've got Huberman Lab. I've got Morgan Housel on December 2nd, Dr. Lane Norton on August 12th, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on June the 24th, Dr. Jonathan Haidt on June the 10th, Protocols to Strengthen and Pain-Proof Your Back on April the 29th, and Dr. Matt Walker on April the 3rd. For Art or Manliness, we've got Rich Mind versus Poor Mind, which was released on that would be November the 25th, and then Unlock Better Sleep and Health by Harnessing Your Circadian Rhythm on August the 21st. Then from the Church of 1122 podcast, I've got Grace is Slow to Anger from November the 3rd, and Grace Does Not Condemn, Grace Cleanses from October the 6th. This is War from July 14th, and Walk This Way from June 23rd. For the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, I've got episode 492, A Psychological Analysis of Trump's Personality. 458, Catherine Burbalsing. She was, someone with education over in the UK. Episode 451 with Alex O'Connor. 429 with Abigail Schreier. 426 with Andrew Clavin. And 418 with Ben Shapiro. Then with Lake Point Church, that's Josh Howerton. It's obviously, we did an entire episode on this when I interviewed him on the show. Election 2024, How to Vote Like Jesus. That was released on October the 7th. Then Mark Driscoll podcast, we've got Is Christian Nationalism a Good Thing on October the 6th? Should Conservatives Overthrow the Government on September the 29th? The Secret to Manhood on September the 25th. The Other Blue Pill on April 1st. How to Win the Battle on April 3rd. Don't Become Your Own Enemy from March 22nd. 4 Tests for Every Man from March 21st. And a Prophetic Mind Melt on Israel from February the 18th. Then from the Unashamed podcast, I've got my appearance there. That was released on October the 3rd. That's episode 968. For PragerU 5-minute videos, Why I Left Utopia, that's from August 19th. Clarence Thomas on Courage from April or May the 20th. And then A Moral Case for Capitalism for March the 4th. On the Mountaintop podcast, I have my appearance on that show. That's from June the 25th. Thinking in Public with Albert Mohler. I got his episode with Abigail Schreier from June the 19th. For the Ben Shapiro Show, I've got his interview with John MacArthur on June the 9th and a psychological breakdown of a rap song from February the 4th. On This Past Weekend with Theo Vaughn, I have the Tim Fletcher interview from April the 16th. For the Sean Ryan Show, I have his appearance of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson on episode 108. For the Matt Walsh Show, I have episode 1361 from May the 3rd. For the Village Church, I have Sex and Intimacy from April the 28th and Husbands and Wives from April the 14th. From the Shepherds Conference, I have Men of the Word, Developing and Disciplining the Men in Your Church from that would be March the 6th. From the JRE podcast, I have episode 2109 with Abigail Schreier. Abigail Schreier is making a lot of appearances on this one this year. And then from Fireside Chat, I've got episode 324 from the 18th of, what would that be? That would be January. Okay. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get into my favorite new podcast of 2024. I love Good Guy, Bad Guy with Chael Sonnen and Daniel Cormier. And so those two guys, they have a good rapport together. Chael Sonnen is one of the most unique personalities in all of sports media. And so if you want to get your MMA fix, that is my personal favorite new show that I've added to the rotation of 2024. Now we're going to get into my best show and my best overall episode of 2024. And so in terms of best podcast show overall, basically what I do is, yes, I will save episodes of individual shows as I listen to them. And then by the end of the year, I'll see, okay, I've saved a lot of these episodes. But I realized something this year. This probably would have been around, August or September. And just so you guys can know, when it comes to my friends, when it comes to people that I know personally or people that I work with, have any type of professional relationship with, I actually judge those people a lot more harshly than I judge people that I don't know. So guys that are in my foxhole, I wear on them and I expect more from them, and I will challenge them more than I will challenge just some random person that DMs me on Instagram, or just some random person that, I'm training or doing something for at that time, because I expect more of the people around me. But around August or September, I realized that Joby Martin was on an epic heater that I don't know that I've ever experienced, because again, for the last couple of years, I've listened to every one of the sermons that he's delivered. But something was different about 2024. And again, I think I went all the way back to some of his sermons from 2016 or whatever. But he was hitting home run after home run after home run. And I kind of got tired of texting him on Monday morning after I would listen to a sermon saying, hey, good job. Hey, fire. Hey, I love this point. Hey, I love that point. And again, I can be real nitpicky, especially when it comes to content. I was that way in my undergraduate all the way through graduate work. Since I am a content creator, I'm always very nitpicky about content, but I just don't really have a lot of nitpickiness about what he's doing. And, I've said this a lot this year, and I'll maintain it. On any given weekend, Joby Martin is the best preacher in America. I absolutely believe that, and especially since I understand his process of, okay, he goes to the woods, he gets in a blind in the dark, and he starts working on his sermon. He prays to God. He says, hey, God, they're your sheep, not mine. What do you want to tell your sheep this week? And then he just gets after it. Right. And I even know here recently he had a sermon of over a particular text that he had never preached before. And so he was kind of nervous. And as of like Thursday morning, he was delivering the sermon for the first time that night. He still didn't have it fully squared away. And so to see how that one even turned out was especially awesome. So for my money for this year, and yes, I know he's my buddy. I know he comes on all the time. But again, that's more reason for me to not give him something. But he just couldn't be denied this year. I think last year I gave it to Jordan Peterson. I think the year before I gave it to Ben Shapiro. But Joby Martin, sir, you got it. The best podcast show overall of 2024, in my opinion, is the Church of 1122 podcast with Joby Sermons. Now we got to get into the best podcast episode of 2024, and there's just no debate on this. The Joe Rogan Experience with Donald Trump. And so I can't remember the episode number, but obviously you can find that just about everywhere, except for the first day after it was released, because you couldn't find it on YouTube. It was getting blocked and kind of like shadow banned a lot of different places. But everyone said for all time that if Donald Trump could go on the Joe Rogan Experience, if he could do 3 hours with Joe Rogan, that it would melt the internet and that it would be the biggest podcast ever. And I think that's where we're at. Like, I don't have official numbers, and I don't think, the Joe Rogan Experience is releasing official numbers. But it's got to be his biggest episode that he did this year. And it's the most important podcast episode that we've seen, especially because of who didn't come on that podcast. Because when the Kamala Harris team found out that Donald Trump was going to go on, I think that was the last month, right? A week or two before the election, right? The Kamala Harris team reached out to Joe Rogan and is like, she would like to come on. And Joe's obviously got a studio in Austin. It's like, all right, he'll bring you out here. We'll make sure security's all squared away. And then we're going to talk for a few hours. And the Harris administration, or the Harris, I guess you can call it the administration, but the campaign was like, yeah, no, how about you come to her? We'll do it in a studio that we set up. We'll have the producer. Here's some subjects that we can't talk about, and we can only go about 45 minutes. So basically, they wanted the Joe Rogan Experience without any of the experience, right? They just wanted Joe Rogan, and they wanted him to put it out on his platform. And Joe Rogan stood by his gun. He's like, no, like that's not how we do this. Like, I'm not going to trap her. I just bring her down here. We'll talk for a few hours, and then we'll go from there. And so, best podcast episode of 2024 has to be Joe Rogan Experience with Donald Trump. Spent 3 hours weaving in and out of a lot of different topics. Joe was trying to like nail him on a few things here or there, you could tell. And Trump, he did the thing. Did 3 hours on Joe Rogan. So, best podcast episode of 2024. So those are other podcasts. Now we need to go to this podcast. So Undaunted Life, a Man's Podcast. It's always fun getting to look back on my year because because I put out so much content, I'll forget, oh yeah, I talked about that, or oh yeah, I had that person on. So it is kind of good to go down memory lane. So let's go into my hardest interview to prepare of 2024. That is episode 570 with Melissa Ohden. It's called Survivor of a Botched Abortion. And so it's right there in the title. Melissa Ohden was supposed to be killed. They actually thought they killed her, right? She was, as a baby, violently expelled from her mother's womb after being tortured, because I think it was a saline abortion. And then whenever she was violently expelled from her mother's womb, she was laid to the side because everyone assumed that she was dead. They cleared the room, and there was one nurse that heard her make a noise. And if you think about the seared consciousness of this is an abortion nurse who was helping kill Melissa. And then that same nurse now is the one that saved her. And to this day, Melissa has not met that woman. She has not found that woman. But you want to talk about hard to prepare? I mean, when I was reading Melissa's book and going over her story, it's just like they literally tried to kill this girl. They tried to kill this little precious innocent baby. And so now she's a pro-life advocate, obviously, and she's kind of creating this network of people that have survived botched abortions, right? And just thank God there are some doctors that are so bad at killing babies that these babies end up getting a chance at life. And a lot of those people, obviously, as you can imagine, grow up to be pro-life. But for me, you just wade into a lot of darkness when you get into those subject matters. So that was the hardest interview to prepare for 2024 for me, and that's episode 570 with Melissa Ohden. Now, the hardest episode to prepare of this year was, for me, easily 638, which is Find Guys That'll Help You Bury Your Dog. So after Roman the Giant died, obviously I talked about him a lot on the show, how much that dog meant to me. And when the dog died, I remember Joby sending me a message saying, yeah, you got to talk about it on the show. And it's like, you don't know me, son. And no, I don't. How about that? Like, no, I'm not going to talk about it on the show. He's like, yeah, you do. And I was like, no, I vehemently disagree. I'm not going to talk about it on the show. I'm not going to be able to get through it. Like, I don't think I can make it. And he's like, yeah, that's the reason why you need to. And so I was like, all right, I'll lean into it. I'll just kind of see how it goes. And I mean, I remember being downstairs, like getting ready, taking a shower and all that. And I'm crying before I get to the studio, just thinking about having to talk about Roman the Giant and having to talk about what my friends did around that time. It's hard. I feel like I'm choking back tears right now. But the number of guys that have reached out to me because of that episode, right? And, something clicked for them. That, you got to have those 3 a.m. friends. You got to have guys that'll help you bury your dogs. Like I've said it so many different ways, but now you guys get it. You guys get it because I'm talking about a dog and I'm blubbering into the microphone. So very, very hard episode for me to prepare. Incredibly hard one for me to deliver. So hardest episode to prepare of 2024, 638. Find guys that'll help you bury your dog. Now, the most offensive episode of 2024, and this is not even close, is episode 582, Christians Should Not Use IVF. So here's the thing about this episode. The title is offensive. It's not meant to be offensive. It's just a summary of my opinion. But if you listen to the episode, I think I do about 40 or 45 minutes explaining the moral issues with the process of in vitro fertilization. I talk about how my own family, right? I have a niece and a nephew because of that process. There are a lot of babies, a lot of kids that I know that are in this world because of that process. But the reality is that in order for those babies to live, a bunch of other babies were sacrificed. A bunch of other babies are basically wasting away in test tubes or, in this constant state of arrested development where they're frozen in time, and they will eventually be disposed of. And so once that information was exposed to me, I was like, holy crap, because I hadn't spent more than 5 seconds thinking about IVF before. I just thought it was kind of this neutral thing. But Albert Mohler and Lila Rose with Live Action, some other people explain, no, IVF, they're going to create 8 human beings hoping that one will survive to full term. And it's just like, whoa, there's something going on here. And the problem with this episode for most people is they're intellectually dishonest because they didn't actually listen to it. I lost a very good friend. He sent me this very angry, very vile, mean, pointed text message as it pertained to this episode. And I could tell in his message that he had not even listened to it. He had not engaged with the content. He's like, I'm not going to support your show by giving you this amount of information and blah, blah, blah. I'm just not going to do it. And it's just like, okay, well, you're refuting my position and yet you don't know what it is. You couldn't elucidate it if you tried. And I know there are other people that are like, they couldn't believe that I would come out against IVF. And, the Christians that use IVF, they're like, they don't see the issue with it. But my job is not to make you feel comfortable. My job is not to point out all the things that you and I agree on and that we're right about. It was incumbent upon me when I found out more about the IVF process and how many babies are being slaughtered via this process, and also homosexual couples using IVF, doing, a sperm swirl and combining it with an egg and putting it in the rented womb of a woman, and just the vile, immoral nature and abominable nature of a lot of the processes that are in and around IVF. Again, it was incumbent upon me to point that out. And so that episode may have offended some of you. Some of you, if you're listening to this, so you obviously came back to the show, and I know I lost some listeners over that. But again, I'm not here to make everyone comfortable. I'm not here to just, give you content that's just going to give you the happies. Sometimes we got to talk about rough stuff. So most offensive episode of 2024, episode 582, Christians should not use IVF. Now, the most talked about interview of 2024 is episode 640 with Megan Basham. And that's when we talked about her book, Shepherds for Sale. So a lot of people, like a lot of people reached out. Hey, are you going to get Megan Basham on to talk about this book? Hey, are you aware of this book? Hey, have you read this yet? Hey, why haven't you had a conversation with her yet? And so we were working that all out behind the scenes. And so we got all that squared away and we got all that done. And so the thing about that book, obviously, it was the number 2 book on our best books of 2024 list. So you know what I feel about that book. But the thing about the interview is it had a lot in common with Christians Should Not Use IVF episode, because like 100% of the complaints, and I got complaints from some prominent pastors. So some dudes on Instagram that sent me some DMs are like, I can't believe you had her on there. She's just attacking the brethren, blah, blah, blah. And then I would ask them all the same question. Have you listened to the episode and have you read her book? And so if they had done anything, they had listened to the episode, but none of them have read the book. It's like, why are you pissing and moaning about a book when literally you haven't read it? You haven't engaged with the material, but you want to critique the material? I don't understand. Imagine saying, oh, I don't like that band's new song. And someone being like, well, have you heard it yet? And you're like, well, no, but it seems like I wouldn't like it, right? I mean, think about how stupid that would be. The same applies to books. And the thing is Megan Basham is editorializing a little bit in that book, but she's showing her work. And the people that, are mad about the interview, like, oh, I can't believe you platformed her. I'm like, if you want to get blocked extra quick, challenge me platforming somebody, you freaking dork. I can talk to whoever the hell I want to talk to. And I talk to a lot of people that I don't agree with on everything. Just about everyone I have on the show, I have major disagreements with their personal philosophies or the things that they put in their books, and I will pick and choose when and where I push on these people when I'm interviewing them. If you don't like it, start your own damn show, build up a huge audience, and then you can pick and choose who you have on your show and who you decide to platform. But if I want to talk to somebody about their book and if I want to engage with their content, come along on the ride. You might learn a thing or two. So most talked about interview of 2024, episode 640 with Megan Basham. Now, the most talked about episode of 2024 is also episode 638, Find Guys That'll Help You Bury Your Dog. So let me pick up my discussion from where I was talking about it earlier, because it was the hardest to prepare. But for years, guys, I've been begging you, get a foxhole, right? And we have our own language around creating a foxhole. Some people like, the Band of Brothers language that comes from kind of the Eldridge clan, Band of Brothers. I've talked about, 3 a.m. friends, right? Find guys that help you bury a body in the, in the middle of the night, that type of thing. I've talked about, whose car are we going to take from the town? Like guys like that are just always down. But for whatever reason, I talk about Roman the Giant dying, and I talk about the horrible process of digging a hole at 2:00 in the afternoon on, the hottest day of the year in Oklahoma, and having Ryan Horn from the Forging Table and Rush Schwebman show up and help me bury my dog. And then all of a sudden, boom, you guys got it. You're like, oh shoot, I need guys like that. It's like, yeah, you need to find guys that'll help you bury your dog. And like I said in that episode, I don't mean fellas that, own shovels that, they'll come over because their wife's like, hey, homeboy's dog died, so how about you run over there, and he's digging a hole, it's hot out, go take him a Gatorade and like help him dig a hole. No. I mean guys that like you didn't invite, guys that just know what happened and they know what you're doing and they're about it and they show up. So a lot of messages, a lot of emails, a lot of people talk to me in person about this episode. So I think episode 638, Find Guys That Help You Bury Your Dog, is easily the most talked about episode of 2024. Now, let's talk about the interview that I was most nervous about of 2024, and that was a recent one with Sam Jolman, The Sex Talk You Never Got. That's episode 676. So if you go back to that episode in the intro, I talk about, oh boy, I think we're about to have another situation here. I think we're about to have, another Crispin Mayfield situation where, the interview is going to be kind of awkward, but it's going to go well, I think. And then later the guy's going to flame me online. But I was nervous about it because I almost canceled the interview because as I was reading the book, I'm like, I don't get it. I disagree with this guy so vehemently. I was in a really busy season. And like, I'm literally preparing this interview while I'm like, eating right after lunch, like at hunt camp for elk in New Mexico. And I'm just like, man, I just don't know if this is worth it. But I sent, one of the early chapters that I had one of the biggest problems with, I sent it to a few guys, a couple of guys here, in my foxhole and, some other folks that are outside of my world just to kind of get their read on it. And I was like, okay, I guess I have to do this. Man, I was nervous. I was like, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to call balls and strikes. I'm not going to be needlessly divisive, offensive, but I am going to poke and I am going to prod. And to Sam Jolman's credit, he was there for it, man. And he was so thankful afterwards before we cut off the interview. And he was super thankful via email and text afterwards. Thank you so much for reading my content and for engaging with it. But if I look back at it, before I hit the record button, I was like, holy crap, I don't know how this is going to go. So that was the interview I was most nervous about of 2024, Sam Jolman, episode 676. Now, the individual episode that I was most nervous about of 2024 was back at 576. What in the world am I supposed to do now? So with that episode, there was some craziness that had happened in my family. And so the thing is like, I don't know if like you're ever like the baby in the family, but I was always like the youngest cousin. And so like I found out about stuff like way after it happened. Like I remember my grandpa, okay, I'm at my cousin's house. This is, 12, 13 years ago. And they were just openly talking about how my granddad had been arrested at the airport because he had a gun in his bag. And I go, wait, pause. Grandpa Robert got what? He got arrested with a what in the where? And they're like, yeah, when he got arrested at the airport because he had a revolver in his travel bag. And I'm like, what? And so like the entire family knew this, but I didn't, because apparently when you're the youngest, you don't get told stuff, or when you're a kid, when certain bad things happen, you don't get told stuff. And so I found out some stuff that just absolutely rocked my world, like shook me to my core. And there was a significant time period where I'm like, Undaunted Life is done. Like I just couldn't see going back to doing Undaunted Life and getting in front of the microphone and all that. And luckily I had a lot of guys around me that are like, dude, you are far from done. You are far from done. And so this was, I believe, my first episode after I kind of realized, okay, yeah, you guys are right. Like I was kind of in my feelings there for a little bit, but there's still work to be done. There's still darkness that needs to be pushed back, and I still need new equipment to be able to do that. But that was I didn't know, like that episode, I didn't really have a lot of notes, and I'm just like, I'm just going to hit record and kind of see where it goes. So when that happens, there's a generally a good amount of nerves, but that was the episode I was most nervous about recording of 2024, episode 576. What in the world am I supposed to do now? But now we need to get into the audience's favorite interview of 2024. Now with this, I can't exactly go just on data. I have to kind of go by data and feel, because obviously if an episode came out in January, it's going to have more cumulative downloads than one that just came out a week or two ago. But based on feedback, based on how many shares, and based on, the people that talked about it, here are the top 3 audience favorite interviews of 2024. So number 3 is my interview that I did with Megan Basham. That was episode 640 that I've already talked about. But episode number 2, the second most favorite, is the episode I did with Victor Davis Hanson. So Victor Davis Hanson is a conservative commentator, kind of helps run a think tank over at Stanford, episode 673. And what I did for that episode is I literally put, there were really no notes. There were like 8, 9, or 10 subject matters that were like big subject matters, like potential World War III, Ukraine and Russia, the southern border, the upcoming election, things going crazy if Donald Trump wins. And I just flowed on everything because I was like, I could read Victor Davis Hanson's books and I could just interview him about his books, but we were at this time where it's like, man, the world seems like it's sitting right on top of a powder keg and no one knows what 2024 is going to look like. Is there even going to be a 2025? And so I just want to talk to this guy and tee him up to talk about everything. And a lot of you guys liked it. That was actually the most viewed YouTube interview of the year for us, was this episode with Victor Davis Hanson. So episode 673 is number 2 on the list of audience favorite interview. But the number 1 audience favorite interview is episode 614 with Mike Glover, Wait for the Dust to Settle. So a lot of you know that Mike Glover had some craziness happening around him this year. He was charged with specious charges for things that 100% did not happen. He was put into jail. He, from like a nose hair away from being put in the hole while in jail. And it was just a horrible situation for Mike, getting dragged on social media, losing a bunch of support from people and losing sponsorships, losing book deals and all this kind of stuff, all based on things that literally did not happen. And behind the scenes, I was helping Mike kind of work his way through this, communicating with some guys that were around him in Utah whenever he was still in jail, and then communicating with him after and kind of going through some of the relational and spiritual stuff that as it pertained to that. And then Mike texted me out of the blue and just said, hey man, I want to come on the show and talk about it. I want you to be the first interview that I do after, since being released from jail. It's like, shoot, okay. And so we did it I think same day or the next morning or something like that. And again, no notes. I just teed him up to talk about it. And so it was, it was a humbling thing for a guy like Mike going through what he was going through to not immediately think, Jocko podcast or Joe Rogan Experience or the, Danger Close with Andy Stumpf or any of those things that he's, I think, since done some of those. But for him to just look at the conversations we had and the guidance I had given him during that time period and to just, tee us up in that way, to just have that conversation, it was really incredible. And the audience responded big time to it. So that is the number 1 favorite episode, interview rather, for the audience, episode 614 with Mike Glover. Now we need to get into the audience's favorite episodes of 2024. So these are, again, I kind of have to go by feel because depending upon when it's released. But the number 3 most favorite episode would be 669, Reasons to Vote for Kamala Harris. And so some of you had problems with that episode. Some of you got what I was doing immediately, and some of you still haven't gotten it. But here's what I will say about episode 669. Go back and listen to it. I think it is the most thorough job that anyone did to explain the reasons to vote for Kamala Harris. So if you haven't heard it yet, 669, go back. The number 2 favorite audience episode of 2024 is episode 548, the top 17 ways to avoid being a crappy man in 2024. Those are always big ones. Those are always ones that guys super duper save around because it's January. It's usually the first episode that I release. It's easily shareable. You got a bunch of people that are like, hey, new year, new me, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's always a crowd pleaser. And we got another iteration of that just around the corner, so you can check that out. But the number 1 audience favorite episode of 2024, again, it's 638. Find guys that'll help you bury your dog. I've already talked about it twice. It's been on the list a lot. You guys loved it. That is the number 1 favorite audience episode of 2024. Now we need to get into my own personal awards here. So here are my favorite interviews of 2024. But before I get into my top interviews, I'm going to give you some honorable mentions. So again, there's a lot of interviews that we do during the year. So I'm going to list a lot here. These are just the ones I was like, oh yeah, I remember something. I really, really like this. So 560 with Elisa Childers, 566 with Greg Hurwitz, 569 with Doug Wilson, 570 with Melissa Oden, 572 with Raymond Ibrahim, 581 with Joby Martin, 592 and 593 with Matt Chandler, 595 with Maddie Montgomery, 604 with Vody Baucom, 607 with Riley Gaines, 616 with Matt Chandler, 626 with Victor Marks, 637 with Victor Davis Hanson, 640 with Megan Basham, 647 with Joby Martin, and then all the saturated episodes. So 648 with Jim Bergen, 649 with Matt Chandler, 650 with Duran Gray, 651 with Ben Stewart, and 652 with Joby Martin, and then 658 with Eric Metaxas, 663 with Donnie Dust, 667 with Josh Howerton, 675 with Hickson Gracie, and 682 with Josh Latimer. But the winner for me, guys, the interview that meant the most to me, and I knew as soon as it was done that it was going to win this award eventually, is 614 with Mike Glover. Again, I've already explained why that was such an important interview. You guys loved it. It was your favorite interview of the year, and it was mine as well. But before we let you go, we've got to get into my favorite episode of 2024. But before I do that, honorable mentions. So here are the honorable mentions. 552, the demonic origins of the Enneagram. 555, did commies already win? 576, what in the world am I supposed to do now? 582, Christians should not use IVF. 590, Jordan Peterson wrestles with the resurrection. 622, they tried to assassinate Donald Trump. 638, find guys that hope you bury your dog. 661, brown belt. That's where I talked about getting my brown belt in jiu-jitsu. 666, no, Christian metal is not satanic. 669, reasons to vote for Kamala Harris. 670, reasons to vote for Donald Trump. And 673, that was my recap episode, Trump, Republicans, and Moloch win big. But the winner of my favorite podcast episode of this year is one that we just did not that long ago, 685, introducing Dominion. So on that episode, I finally released to the public an idea that I had been working on for a long time, because I had always had this thought like, okay, I'm just going to keep cranking out content. Let's get this content out there. But then I would keep running into these guys that just wanted more. They're like, Kyle, I've listened to your entire backlog. I've listened to all, near 700 episodes. I've read all your devotionals. I've seen you speak live. I've seen all that stuff. I want more. I want you to help me. I want you to help me in my world and my sphere of influence. And so the introduction of the Dominion program is filling that gap. This is me, getting out from behind the microphone, because sometimes I forget, like, there are people on the other end of this microphone, because I'm creating so much content that I forget that there are people like you trying to live life, run a business, run your family, and, that you're trying to apply the things that we're saying here on the show. And so with that in mind, we created this program. Guys, you can get more information, Undaunted.Life/Dominion, Undaunted.Life/Dominion. We opened it up for the public. I remember the night before the episode came out, because the episode came out the same day that we opened up applications for the program. I'm telling my wife, I'm like, no one's going to even apply for this. Like, it's dumb. It's a stupid name. No one's going to do it. Everyone hates me. I'm stupid. I'm a redhead. Like, this is how it was always supposed to happen. And before I woke up, we already had a couple of dozen applications. And that was just based on guys that listened to the podcast early. I heard about guys literally pulling over on the highway on the way to work to put in an application, because I said it was going to be first come, first serve, and it was going to be a very, very limited number of guys accepted into the program. And with the program, it's a 6-month program. We're running teams from January to June, and then we'll run more teams from July to December, and then, get right back around for 2026. And so that was a major step for us. As I talked about on that episode, we've had some big things happen, doing the first YouVersion Bible study, launching the podcast, deciding to do interviews, launching the forging table, and then Dominion is just one of those core things for Undaunted Life that, this is where we're going to equip men to push back darkness. The podcast certainly does that. The devotionals we've written do that. Every time I speak live, I try to do that. But this is really taking that, and this is me putting my time, effort, and money where my mouth is to getting other guys that are willing to put the same thing in to get a better result for the world that is around them. So that is my favorite episode of 2024, episode 685, Introducing Dominion. Now, before we let you guys go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost, if I can get through it here at the end, talking like a wind-up monkey. But at Undaunted Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. Got a link to our donation page, so it's just Undaunted.Life/donate. And then also a link to our Dominion page. So if you guys want to put in a wait, so we've opened up the wait list. So we had applications, but now it's all wait list until we open up interviews again in June. So make sure you get in your applications to be on the wait list. That is in the show notes as well. And then also I've got a list of all the things that I said. So it's not going to be links to all of these things, but it's just the list of all of the shows I listen to, the random episodes that you guys should listen to, and all the awards that we had. So it's all there. Check it out in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.